welcome to our leadership podcast, Leading at a Local Level. It's great to be here with John again, and we're going to be exploring today the whole idea of doing feedback well. But before we get into that, how are you, John? Are you doing well?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Tim. Yeah, no, good. Enjoying the rather darker days, but a bit of sun shining through, so all is good in the world.
Are you suffering through homeschooling?
Yeah, it's a challenge. So let's hope that it's quiet this end. Then about you?
Yeah, this morning I had to wrestle with one of my youngest child this morning in order to literally physically wrestle with him so he could burn off some energy, so he's ready to sit down. And as you can tell, I'm struggling with my hair. Actually, my hair is getting super long, and I'm very conscious of how long my hair is getting. But there's no chance of getting to any hairdresser soon. It's you're going distinguished. You're looking more distinguished with your hair.
Yeah, the longer my hair goes, I think it goes greyer the longer it gets. So yeah, I have to.
Good. So one of the questions we've had, so the way that we do our Leading at a Local Level podcast is we really want to focus in on issues that are relevant at a local level. So if you're leading a local church, if you're just leading a home group, if you're leading a kids ministry, music team, or if you're in a local business or a local charity, we want to really try and sort of get the issues that kind of, I suppose, scratch where the itch is in your leadership life. And so one of the questions we've had is really this whole idea of giving feedback, doing feedback well, because we've all had experiences, haven't we, John, of feedback that either doesn't happen, so there's no feedback, which is most common, or feedback which really is just criticism. And as leaders, we want to do it well. And so we're going to explore that subject today. So John, you have had something from a guy called David. So do you want to share what David's been giving you, and then we can work it out from there?
Yeah, sure. Great. So this is from David. So David is in leadership in his local church, and he says this: recently, one of my preaching team asked me for feedback on a sermon that he gave 3 weeks ago. I didn't know what to say, as I don't remember all of his points. I'm thinking, yeah, same for me. To be honest, what I do remember was that it wasn't all that great, but I found myself telling him that it was good and that he should keep going. I felt awkward and didn't know what to say. And David carries on. He says, in my day job, we're encouraged to give feedback to our colleagues, but I haven't seen it done much in my church before. For example, no one's ever told me how I do leading our small group. Any tips? Much appreciated.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Rather a typical kind of situation, I think, in most churches. I don't know if you agree with that, John.
Absolutely, and I think I go back into one of my boys. Typically, their response being good to most things that you ask them. But yeah, that really resonates with me.
Indeed, or your wife says fine. The magic's fine. Right. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah, indeed. So I suppose the question is that why is feedback important? Why should we even bother? Like, what's the point? Surely if people just love the Lord, they're doing their best. Just let them crack on. We don't want to be an excellent. I think sometimes we get freaked out by this kind of obsession with excellence. I don't know about you, but why? If someone's asking, well, why is feedback so important? Why do I have to go through the pain of giving and receiving feedback? Why bother? What's to be gained really by doing it? What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think when we think of feedback, it leads to all sorts of things in our minds, doesn't it? Maybe we remember that feedback that we got, when we were kind of doing our first job and it wasn't perhaps the most glowing, or the first time we kind of stepped up front and done something, we pushed ourselves, and then we get this feedback from people, which can be difficult to take. But my experience is, Tim, and I don't know about yours, is that feedback is just incredibly important in terms of the way we're thinking about developing ourselves, but also other people. And I think that, it's very biblical as well. Like in the church, we're not an organization, we're not a business, but we actually are a family, and we've got a responsibility to one another in that family. And we see that in, Ephesians 4 is a great example of this, where, he speaks about in verse 11, Christ gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service, to build up the body of Christ so that we might become mature. And then later on he said, in verse 15, speaking the truth in love, that will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him. And And actually we build one another up in love, verse 16, as each part does its work. And so I think actually growing, being built up, speaking the truth in love, like that's feedback. So although Paul doesn't use that word, I just think it's a thoroughly biblical principle that we're called to build one another up and to speak in love and to do it well. That's kind of
absolutely. I mean, I was talking to our church a couple of weeks ago really about 2021 and really what is God wanting to do in you, because I think sometimes we have to have a mindset which says, Lord, I want to grow. And actually, if you're going to grow, the best way to grow, I think, is to have someone who's kind of inputting into your life and kind of saying, you're doing this. Because I mean, I don't know you, but I've learned a lot of things in the classroom. But I've learned probably more by doing it and getting it wrong and doing it and getting it right and doing it and tweaking it than I have in a classroom. I don't. It's probably.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if you've watched the Mandalorian, so I'm a bit of a Mandalorian fan now. And I was watching
Star Wars Geek.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I was watching the spin-off stuff on Disney where they're telling you how they're doing it. And basically, like it's fascinating, the technology they're using and all these LED screens. And they were basically saying, like, we're learning by doing, and then giving each other feedback, and they're just talking you through that process of like, we try this and then we feed back on it, and it might be very individual, it might be for a whole company that's involved. And it's so true, isn't it? I think we know that just by practice, that when we do stuff, that's when we learn. But that's the hurly-burly of kind of learning and the feedback cycle kind of kicking in.
Yeah, and I think the reality is actually that feedback, it just kind of happens. Like, right. So I think the truth is that, so I preach, right? And even if I don't ask for feedback, you're already getting feedback, right? No, seriously, because like if you preach and it's a bad message, right, and no one says anything, that's feedback, right? And that is feedback. It may not be the feedback you want, but it's feedback. If you do something really well, people are like, oh, that was great. That was really good. And so I think the reality is that feedback is a part of life. I think the question is really where do we take it deeper? I mean, I don't know if you agree with that, but
Yeah, and we can think of feedback. You're right. You're totally right. We can think of feedback as a very formal thing, and it can be very formal. So in my work, there is a formal process of feedback from like the patients that I deal with, from staff as well, from colleagues. So that I think many of us are familiar with that. But you're right. I mean, we get feedback every day. I mean, if you think about it, like we're constantly sort of being throughout our lives at school, being kind of ranked and graded, and which class you're in, which set you in.
Yeah, exactly.
We've been chosen or accepted or rejected or invited to stuff. Like actually we're getting feedback all the time, and I guess what we're saying is how we handle that. And you're right, whether we choose to kind of go deeper is key to our growth. And I love what you said about preaching, because it's so true, isn't it? Like we know we're getting feedback if you stand up and preach, or you stand up in front of anybody, you're getting instant feedback from somebody dozing off on the front row to somebody else distracted. You just can tell, can't you, right at the front? So, and people would also give honest feedback, I think, after the event as well. So we all know that if you people give feedback to one another, it can also be called other words like I suppose like gossip or chat, but you might never hear it. And so I guess probably I'd rather hear the feedback, even if it's a bit painful, than actually know the feedback's happening, but it's happening in a room on the other side of town about what I've done and what I've
Maybe that's why I always ask for feedback, John, because I'm worried what people are going to say. So I'd rather know, just slight insecurity. I think the reality is, though, is that I don't know if you find, but I think feedback is very emotionally exhausting. And I think that's a real challenge around the whole feedback thing, is that it is an emotionally exhausting experience. To receive it is emotionally exhausting. My dad used to say, don't give anyone feedback on their preaching until at least a couple of days afterwards. Sometimes particularly if it's new, I tend to follow that process. Sometimes if it's like your friend, you can maybe do it a bit earlier than that. But I think that what he was identifying is don't go and smash someone like 5 minutes after they've done it, because they're emotionally exhausted anyway, and you're kind of coming in and I think to be honest, it's also emotionally exhausting giving feedback, because you think, well, what if I say something, this person doesn't receive it? They've just thought, and that this is going to be really harsh. And so I think actually people avoid the emotional challenges of feedback. And so one of the things that we wanted to do today, isn't it? We really wanted, I think, to just explore this together, didn't we? And I think you've written down some points that you think are really helpful in doing feedback well, and really kind of just doing feedback well. So why don't you just kick us off, John, with some things that you've come up with, and we can just work through them together.
Yeah, no, that's right. That'd be good. So I think the first thing I'd say is that we want to kind of step back a little bit and just think about the whole feedback thing. And we've said very generally like why why feedback's good. We think it's biblical. We think it's a healthy thing. We think it's good to pursue it. I would kind of probably say first of all that we want to encourage people. Like we kind of said that already, really, with a biblical way. We want to help people know where they're doing well, not to kind of flatter them, but to actually encourage them and to say, you know what, keep going. You know, like and I care about you, and I care about the amount of time and effort you've put into preparing, you know, that talk or that, you know, that kind of worship set or that small group. And I think people often don't know how they're doing. Like I often don't know how I'm doing with the stuff that I'm doing. Like I don't know, with this podcast, probably, I don't know about you, we probably don't know how we're doing until we kind of have some feedback from people who say, you know, that was too long, or you talk too much, or that was really good and I really appreciated how you did that. So actually we need it to kind of help us know where we're at and where to invest our time, where not to invest our time, and help people to understand how God's shaped them. And I found it incredibly helpful to have people feedback to me, because it helps me understand how God's made me. It helps me understand that, okay, well, I've got some strengths in that area, but I need to work on that other area, and just to kind of grow in that sort of self-awareness. So I don't know if you found the same for you, Tim.
Absolutely. I think to me, that's the way to see feedback is actually, if I give feedback well, I can really encourage someone. And I think one thing that, you know, when we think about feedback, I think we subconsciously, I think our minds often go to the negatives, like what can I do to improve? And when I was a teacher, you used to have to write EBI, even better if. And actually, but I think there's just something really valuable in being basically a Barnabas. Do you know what I mean? Like my heart is just to encourage you, and I'm going to encourage you not just by saying it was fine or it was good, but I'm going to say, you know, when you went off, I mean, if you're preaching this is, but you know, when you went into that explanation, it just made so much sense. It really clicked for me. It was really helpful. Or, you know, if you're leading a music practice, or the way that you got us to repeat that stuff again and again was just so good. It really helped me get it. I think it's so encouraging. Who doesn't want to be told they're doing well? And I think actually people thrive when they're confident. And when you're confident when you know you're doing well. And if people are telling you you're doing well, then, you know, well, apart from, you know, someone like me who maybe sometimes need to be told I'm not doing quite as well, because I'm probably swinging the other way and need a bit of a, like, you know, my wife is brilliant at that, by the way. I think that's her ministry, is to kind of, you know, is to kind of bring me that. She sometimes says it's my job to keep your feet on the floor. But I think that whole idea of feedback as encouragement, I think, is just such a brilliant place to start. How can I encourage this person? And if that's our attitude going into it, then I think immediately that whole conversation takes a completely different tone, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And that's where it comes back to, I guess, being family and like building from like a solid sort of relationship base. So I want feedback from people I've got a good relationship with. Absolutely. And it is tempting to seek out people who are going to always tell me what I want to hear. Okay, it is. But there are people that I know, you know, deeply respect. So just before, I mean, the laugh is I ask you for feedback sometimes, don't I, Tim? So we needed to record this, you know, and we're running out of time a little bit. And I'd ask you to feedback on my sermon. But I asked you because ironically, you've listened to half of it and you've given me half the feedback. So I'm looking forward to the next half. That's the kind of don't know, not how not to do feedback. Anyway, we'll come to that. But I ask you because I know that you kind of,
because I'm so wise. I'm so wise.
Of course you're wise. But actually, I also know that you'll tell me. You won't just tell me what I want to hear, but you'll tell me as it is. But you tell me from a place of relationship. And I think that's very important when we're kind of seeking feedback, when we're giving feedback, is that we want to encourage people, but we want to do it from a place of relationship. I'm for you, I'm for you, and I want to see you grow. And so if you're getting feedback from somebody who that's the only time they ever speak to you, like 4 times a year, they give you some feedback, I'm sorry, but it's just not great. Yeah, it needs to be in a context of relationship, so that if there is something hard to say, like you take it in that context. This person is for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a good point, because I've found the best people to give me feedback are the people that are close to me. Yeah. And I sometimes it's helpful to get. Sometimes it's always helpful sometimes to get an external perspective. Yeah. But like, if I send my sermon to someone who doesn't really know me and ask them to give me feedback, they don't know me, they don't know the church, they don't know the people that are listening. If I'm asking someone to reflect on my leadership and they see 5 minutes of me in a meeting, or they watch an hour of me in a meeting, that's not the whole story. And I think you're absolutely right. And I don't know if you find this, John, but I guess the reason you asked me about feedback on your preaching, and we do this to one another, by the way, just if you're watching this podcast, like we don't just preach this, we do it. We do ask each other all the time, and what do you think of that and stuff. And I think when you know someone loves you, you can trust them. And I think knowing you're loved is really important, I think, to be honest, because you can take it when you know you're loved. And so don't look at my encouragement. If you're looking for someone to give you feedback, find someone you know loves you, because then when they tell you something negative, your relationship isn't going to get strained. Whereas if you're not sure they really love you and then they challenge you, it's much harder. I don't know if you agree, John, but much harder to I don't know, to take it, I guess. So I think, yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, John. So you reckon, so what was your first point?
Oh goodness, I'm trying to remember now. I didn't really write this down, but it's about that second point was about basically first encouraging, and then it was about from a position of relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So be an encourager, go to people you know. What's your third point then, John? What do you reckon the next thing people can take away from this?
Yeah, I think sometimes we get very narrow and think about, how do I do feedback? But what I'd say, as leaders, if we're thinking kind of as leaders at a local level, that we're thinking about how do I create a culture like where it's kind of like normal to ask for feedback. And I think sometimes we can sometimes think, oh, no one else is asking for feedback, and what if I ask somebody, will we know how to do it? And I think sometimes we don't know how to do it. We think, oh, I don't know how to give feedback, or I don't know how to ask for it. But if it's part of like a culture, if we've set the tone as leaders that this is what we do, then I think it's much easier. And I don't know, Tim, you obviously worked, been in different churches and work situations. Have you found, in terms of culture, have you found like a positive place, a place we thought, actually, there's a healthy kind of sense of culture here about how we do feedback?
Well, I mean, obviously being a teacher for a number of years, there was not a healthy culture of feedback in teaching. There was definitely feedback, but it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was a healthy culture. So you felt like you had to hide things because there was a judgment at the end of it. So when they do, were you good? Were you outstanding? Were you satisfactory, by which that means unsatisfactory? Or were you genuinely really awful, which is unsatisfactory? Yeah. And so I think where people feel there's a value judgment attached, I think that's really unhelpful. So, if that feedback is about a judgment of your ability or your character, I think that's quite unhelpful. So that was poor. And I think I've seen the churches doing it better and better. I don't know if you have, John, but I think churches are beginning to learn how to do it well. And I would say, again, I speak of our church now, the church I'm in at the moment. I'd say that when someone preaches, there's an expectation that they're always looking for feedback. They'll often ring me up. What did you think? Did it work for you? Do you think I got that bit right? And I think that comes because I suppose, on a personal, I'm quite an open person. If you know me, you'll know that, I'm pretty open. And I think that helps, because I think particularly as the main leader in a church, but I suppose any leader in any environment, if you go first and you're inviting feedback, and then if it's negative, be like, yeah, I see that, I recognize that, you immediately permission other people to ask for feedback. I mean, what about you? I mean, you've done medicine and you've done charity and church. What have you seen?
Yeah, well, I mean, what I've found unhelpful is when I've not known when feedback's going to be. So when it's very haphazard,
right?
It might be like one of my bosses, on one of my consultants gives a lot of feedback, another one gives none. Or we're suddenly told we have to kind of give feedback to someone else. And it's all very kind of hit and miss. And so I've found it really helpful just to kind of normalize it. So to say, like, this is what we do. And actually in this organization, perhaps, or perhaps in my church, this is what we do. So if you preach that, actually a couple of days later, let's talk about it. And that's just the same for everybody, because then no one feels picked on, because it can be, otherwise I've been in that place where I felt picked on. I'm just like, I'm the only one being sat down here by the pastor to be, spoken to. But it's quite nice just to normalize it, like, for everybody. It's just, this is what we do. And then you might say, okay, well, I found in my charity work that I say to my team leaders, I'm going to check in with you regularly. Every 6 months, we're going to sit down and review how you're getting on, and how is it for you? And I'll say, how is it for me? And then every year we have quite a formal sort of process of doing that. And the fact it's kind of set up in advance and people know it's coming just normalizes it, just says this is who we are, this is what we do. And I found that quite healthy and safe to have that kind of in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you say, regularity is really important. Doing it regularly, there's nothing worse than, particularly if you've got some things you want people to improve, you stack them all up in a massive list. And then you're like, right, point one of, 27. And they're like, oh, it's like, A, they're not going to process that because they're not going to remember it all. It's much better just to pick it up in different points. Let me ask you a question, John. I mean, this is this genuine question here. Like, one of the one time I find feedback difficult, I think, is giving feedback to people that are either significantly older than me and are not really looking to improve. And that's not because they're lazy or they don't care, but in a sense, like, I don't know, like, what's the point almost? Do you know what I mean? It's like they're doing their best. And I think that's where I find it difficult. So I don't know, how do you just focus on people that you think really want feedback, or do you just, because sometimes it can be a really awkward conversation when you're having a conversation with somebody thinking they don't want this feedback. I would be better off not bothering.
I mean, it's interesting that when that David's kind of said that he's got somebody who's asked him for feedback.
Exactly.
I think in many ways it's much easier because immediately somebody is basically, by saying that, they're saying, I'm ready to learn, like, I'm ready to hear what you have to say. I want to grow. And you're right, it's really hard when people are, and sometimes it's very deliberate. So sometimes people sometimes people just don't want to learn. They don't want to grow. They have, they just are averse to that. And that's very difficult. I mean, we can encourage people to want to have that teachable spirit. And sometimes we can do that. Sometimes it's more challenging. And then there were those who asked, but in the middle, I think there's people who are just maybe not aware of it. So they maybe haven't even thought to ask, or they maybe thought, well, that's something for work. But here, this is kind of, I'm just preaching what God's given me to give. Why would anyone want to feedback on that? So I think sometimes it's just gently, but certainly in my team, I lead many people who are well advanced to me. And on the shop floor in the hospital, they're my bosses. There's a hierarchy. I don't feed back to them, if you like, on their performance. But I think normalizing it and saying, well, actually, this is what we're doing. We're all seeking to grow. Whatever age that we are, there's room for growth. This is biblical. This is something we do for one another, trying to build that in so that those people in the middle perhaps become aware and perhaps develop a heart, develop a desire to grow, whatever age that they are.
Good. Yeah, it's very good. And I think absolutely doing feedback well, I think, is about getting used to it.
Yeah.
Putting it simply, the more you do it, I mean, you can talk about creating a culture, but really what that means is so people are kind of expecting it, used to it, now to do it well, isn't it? Really, that's the thing. So,
and I think if you are leading something, whether you're the big leader of everything or you're leading something, to lead by example. And it's very, I that's what I've done with my team. Is at the end of our reviews, whether they've asked for feedback themselves on what they're doing or not, I always have that question. I'll say, what's it like being the other side of me?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Give me something specific. What is it that how am I encouraging you? What is it that I do?
Is that just you fishing for compliments?
Well, yeah, no, genuinely isn't. Although to be honest, it is always encouraging. It's amazing how little, we all know this. It's amazing how little encouragement we often get, how little feedback we often get on how we're doing. So yeah, it is nice, but genuinely, I want to know if the way that I'm leading this person or this group is annoying or frustrating people, or they're hearing mumblings. I want to hear it, and I want to hear it in a one-to-one conversation. And so I will ask them. And I think it means that I'm showing that I'm ready to grow and learn. And I can't make you, as somebody who's my elder or wiser than, I can't make you kind of reciprocate that. But I'm doing, as far as it goes with me, I'm doing what I can to set that tone.
Absolutely. So, okay, John. So we've got be an encourager was our first point. Can you remember your second point, John? Get feedback from the right people.
Yep.
And the third is about really kind of creating an expectation, a culture, if you will, around the feedback so people expect it. What else? You got anything else that you think is helpful?
Well, one thing, like when David kind of said that he'd been asked that question, I want feedback. And sometimes the answer is, oh, it was great. You should keep going. And one thing that I thought was, about being specific, that really sprung to mind. And I think sometimes when we don't know how to give feedback or how to ask for it, it can be very blanket. How did I do? oh, it was great, and I think that can be encouraging to a degree, but I think being specific, like when we ask for feedback, actually get specific about it. And I found that really helpful so I actually specifically say to people, how was my tone? Did you get my overall, what I was talking about? How was my delivery to camera today? Did I have any distracting habits? We all know that it can be us, but you think, there's this habit, and they've obviously never asked anybody whether it's distracting or not, or how well did I apply scripture today so being very specific about what you're asking. And then
you're specific about your asking, or specific about what you're feeding back?
Well, I think both. So I think if you're asking, so the person who's asking David for feedback is saying, how was my preach? I think David would probably find it helpful if he was asked a few more specific questions.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
Can we catch up on that? But
actually, I suppose it's a way of focusing on maybe areas that you think you're weak or you're trying to work on. Because sometimes I think when you've done something like in leadership, you're like, I know I did that on purpose. I know that you're not going to receive that, or I'm, if I'm leading a Bible study, I don't really need to know, how the quality of my tea was, or whether the biscuits were suitable for your, to your taste, whether you preferred hobnobs as opposed to bourbons. But what I am interested in is really, was I good at including everybody in the group? Do you think did I put too much pressure on people? So I suppose that's again, asking those specific questions might be very helpful in the context, I guess, of a business. Do you think, that this particular marketing campaign or this particular social media type post is really having an impact? How do you think people are receiving that? And I think the more you do, I don't know if you think, the more that you get used to feedback, because I'm just talking this as I say it, I realise I do this all the time. I'm always asking specific questions to people all the time about, what did you think of this? What do you think of that? And I suppose I've learned that without thinking about it. But I think often people just say, well, was it okay? And then sort of people go, yeah, it was great. You did really well. Good work. And you're like, that's good. I did well. I don't know why I did well, but I did well, and you're like, that's not helping me do well again next time. Next time might be rubbish, but
and we all get confused because we're like, well, next time I thought I did well, but I've been told it wasn't as good, and I'm not quite sure why. And that means that when we're giving feedback, like, it's good to be clear, like, it's good, and it's good to kind of pick up on specific points. It actually honors people. It shows that we've actually listened. So it's not that kind of thing, well, I kind of listened, but I didn't really take it all in, and I'll just say something because it's, I just want to move on with the rest of the day and get on with it. So it challenges us. That's why it's hard work. You said near the beginning, it's hard work to actually do good feedback, because we have to really listen. And then we say, right, okay, well, what's most important? And it might be that you've seen someone lead something and you think, oh my goodness, I could pick out 20 things that I would do differently, or I think I could do better. So I think we can be specific, but in being specific, you're making that choice. And what am I going to focus on? Like, what's most important for me to feed back on? And that might be instigated by the other person saying, I really want you to tell me whether I had any distracting habits. And you could say, do you really want to know? Do you really want to know how many?
Can I just say, talking realistic, I spoke at one of John's conferences for CMF, and I asked John, and he said, you do have, and what was it? What was my specific, was it I can't remember. I say which is terrible, because now you're all going to be looking at this podcast. The number of times I say the word and it's my thought process. As in, like, when I'm trying to get some space, I say So, but some things you can't get rid of, can I just say, without professional help.
You then said that you were paranoid then after that for weeks. You're like, I'm just so aware of every time I say and then I was like, no, it's fine. Like, don't worry about it. It's So I think being specific is helpful.
That point, that's so important. Let's just dig into that a little bit, John, because I think that's really helpful. I think the reality is sometimes, particularly when you're dealing with a young'un, someone that's new at something, a novice, and you look at them and you think, my word, like, I remember thinking, I used to do teacher training, and you'd be like, okay, so that was a disaster. Like, I've got like 27 things you did wrong and about one thing you did right, which was turn up and write your name on the board. So how do you do that when you've got a situation, you've got to give feedback to someone, and it's like, I'm struggling to find the positives here, and the positives are kind of weak positives. How do I really, make this encouraging rather than negative? Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good point. Again, probably my get out answer is if it's in the overall context of relationship, where you've actually got a relationship with this person outside of this particular task or thing that they're doing, and you're actually somebody who is an encourager, you're known for being an encourager, and the words that you say, the messages that you send, in other areas that they perhaps find easier, that you're somebody who will spot the good and will point it out, that you may come to an aspect of their life or the work that they're doing or the ministry in church that is more challenging. And so that means that you perhaps can get away with actually saying, well, do you know what, actually there are a few things that I think we need to talk through. So in the big picture, it can still work. But I think even with just the microcosm of that issue, there's always positive things that we can pull out, even if it's, I really appreciate you've worked hard. Like, you've clearly put in so much preparation. Your heart is clearly to be, a blessing to other people.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
There's always things that we can find to encourage people with, but that shouldn't sugarcoat the fact if they're really ready to hear it, that we say, well, okay, let's dig in, and I've got a couple of points. And you might limit it. Remember, you don't have to get all your feedback out in one go. It's really tempting to say, right, I've got 20 things for you to improve on. Like, this is something that will go on hopefully over months and over years. And you might just like with parenting, like, you don't pick up on if you try to pick up on every annoying habit of your children, which I sometimes do, it's exhausting. It doesn't get you anywhere. Like, let's pick our battles, and choose what we're going to focus on first.
Definitely doesn't work when I tried that with my wife. Can I just say, I learned that early on in my marriage. So
you gave a list, did you?
But I did. Not quite, but I found that I needed to be more of an encourager in my marriage. But that was when I was 16 years ago, whatever it was. But I think this is just such an interesting conversation, because I think it is such an important issue, really. And I think so often people get it wrong. I mean, have you got anything else that you want to add? That if you were talking to someone about how to give feedback, what about the idea? I said, I've just asked you a question and then I'm about to give you a point. Let me chuck one in there. Go on quickly, right? Yeah. I think that so often you need to identify. What I do is, I don't know if you do this, but I will verbalize the difference between what I would say is objective feedback and subjective feedback, right? So I would say, and I'm trying to think how a good way to explain this, but like, you say, this is my opinion, this is subjective, right? I think this is what I think. Other people may well have seen that differently. Yeah. And then there's more of the objective stuff, like, that was just good. Like, objectively, that this isn't my opinion, I just think that was really good. Or, obviously it depends. Like, obviously, I guess in a business environment, like, your numbers just aren't quite good enough, or in teaching, for example, you could just look, and I would say, so in teaching, you'd say, I don't care whether you think you did well, when you look around the room, no one was listening. That's an objective fact. You preached, and to be honest, there were 7 people asleep. Not that you were sitting there counting, but it's whereas, and I think that's sometimes helpful. I mean, do you do that sometimes, or is that just me?
Yeah. No, definitely. And there were some things, of course, that when we do it, or when other people do it, you just think, I can't afford that to happen again. It's all well and good, sort of be nice and encouraging, but if there are times when I had somebody stand up and just something that they said was just so off point in terms of where we were heading as a church. It wasn't biblical. You name it, it was all there, and I couldn't just let that go. I wasn't asked for feedback. Yeah. But I needed to. That's part of my role as a leader at that time in that church, was to actually say, no, we need to deal with that, and I need to give some feedback. But it's pretty straight. And I sometimes use the term hard opinion, soft opinion with some of my team. So actually, no, I really think this, and you need to change.
That's good, actually. I love that. That's really good. Yeah, hard opinion, soft opinion. I think this is a kind of like, I definitely think this. I really feel this is subjective. I really feel strongly in my opinion about this. But the soft opinion is, I could be wrong. Other people might have seen it this way. Take it or leave it. I think that's really helpful. Hard opinion is not opinion.
Maybe it's my personality. Maybe that's just the way I heard you. Other people may have really enjoyed what you did. But soft opinion, like my perspective, this would be what I'd suggest. Yeah, I found that helpful. It's a good point. I mean, Tim, what about, you mentioned objective stuff. What about using sort of tools and things? Have you used tools? I mean, it's something that I've done sometimes to kind of say, well, actually, it's not just me saying this, but we've got an objective way of kind of measuring and giving you feedback.
Well, by tools, do you mean things like SurveyMonkey and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I haven't sent around a survey monkey after my sermon on Sunday. On a scale of 1 to 10, how good was it? On a scale of 1 to 10, how close were you to the seventh heaven? Or third heaven, sorry. But but yeah, I suppose it depends, isn't it? And do you not think the challenge with those kind of things, I mean, is that you have to be very careful about the questions you ask. But I think, taking my when I was speaking at your conference a while back, you obviously sent out some feedback forms about the whole conference. Yeah. And actually what was good, actually, there was some really interesting things that came out of that feedback. And I was quite pleased that obviously there were some responses. Like my favourite session was the sessions that Tim did on, what was it? I'm trying to think what I did now. Was it on, was it conflict, wasn't it?
Conflict.
And how to handle conflict, yeah. And that, so from an encouraging point of view, it was great to get that kind of. They didn't have to say that. I wasn't asking them, and they volunteered it. And I guess it depends. I mean, when have you used objective measures or tools in that sense?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I sometimes use it like just on myself. So it might be some of these tools you can use to kind of look at your personality side of things, but But you can then measure it up against that. So you can say like, supposedly I'm an IFTJ or something. How does that come across? I might use that with people, but for our conferences and so on, we will give standard questions to people to feedback on. We say like, here's some standard questions. We're going to ask a range of people, and what do you think? And I don't use that so much personally for me. Usually it is for something like a conference. We've done it for this podcast, haven't we? Asked a range of people, what do you think? Here's some standard questions. But you're right, it's all about the questions that you ask. As with any sort of survey, it's all about what you ask.
I think also the thing with feedback is the best type of feedback, I think, focuses around who you are and your character and your general approach to things. Because taking like a sermon or even a leadership situation, every sermon is different, every situation is different. I might handle that passage completely differently next time. There's not one way to handle a passage, and you might not like. So in a sense, I find feedback about specifics like that, or about how I might have handled that situation. It's all, sometimes it's very, very, very specific that almost it's never going to occur again. So it's almost unhelpful. But I find that where kind of feedback is really helpful is focusing on me as a person, really, I guess, and how I'm progressing in terms of just sort of like as a preacher, you are becoming, you're just, we're loving your passion. We really enjoy your passion, for example. Or as a leader, you're handling people. I just feel your improvement. You're handling people more sensitively, which was demonstrated by that one individual situation. And I think that, and I think that's why probably tools, you have to use them quite specifically, because often you can get specific feedback about a particular moment, but actually will that replicate itself again? Probably by the time it does, you've forgotten what people said about it anyway. So yeah, but I do think tools are good. I think it's definitely worth exploring it in the right context for sure. So it's good. So John, I think I'm conscious of time. This has been a great conversation. I think we've just absolutely dug quite deeply into this. I've personally really enjoyed it, found it very helpful just to refresh myself on some of these things. Any kind of final thoughts?
No, I'll be giving you some feedback on how you've hosted the show today. So we'll do that afterwards, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely, we will. But yeah, it's great. So we do release some notes with this, a PDF of notes which you can find in the description and the links. And we just encourage you, if you've got a question for us to explore, we can do more of these if people are enjoying them. If you've got a question, send them in to us and we'll dig a question. We might even get some people in on the show to talk with us on some subjects. We'd love to do that. So obviously we're building this at the moment, just in episode 3. So we'd love to hear from you. Please do comment. Please do text us. Give us feedback. Are we doing well? Is this boring? Is it rubbish? Should we change this? Should Tim get a haircut? Amen. Yes, he should. Look at that. Look, I've got the wings going out the side. Can't help it. Should John use hair dye? Should John dye his hair blonde? There's a question for us. But John, it's been great. We're looking forward to the next one we do. Really enjoyed this. Thanks for being with us, and hopefully we'll see everybody next time.
Cheers.